Hello everyone, welcome to the 7th episode of Youth Power. I'm your host, Zhong Yutong. The world is undergoing unprecedented changes and challenges, including but not limited to the climate change, the ongoing pandemic, and to put on top of that, the breakneck speed of technological development. If there were ever a time in human history where we should all be working together, it's probably right now. And that responsibility is especially heavy on those who wield great political and economic power. So I suppose many of you may already have a faint idea of what we are going to talk about today. Yes, this episode of Youth Power will be centering around the world's two biggest economies, the United States and China, who should be doing all they can in leading the world in dealing with its shared greatest problems. We all know that on November the 16th, President Xi Jinping and President Joe Biden held a virtual meeting and exchanged views on the issues that concern both countries. And President Xi Jinping really vividly compared the two countries to two giant ships sailing in the ocean. And he said it's important for the two sides to put a steady hand on the rudder so that the two giant ships can break the waves and forge ahead together, without losing direction or speed, still less colliding with each other. For this episode of Youth Power themed Too Big to Fail, China-US relations in the eyes of Generation Z, we have interviewed some young people on the streets of China and the United States, and also invited some Generation Z members to our studio to share their thoughts and comments on these interviews. Politics, economics, education, the pandemic, culture, and sport are among things that we will talk about. Be ready to hear some great fresh ideas with China-US relations as the backdrop. Our young sailors have checked the wind, set the sails, and are now ready to share what they think and how they feel. So please, come aboard.
So happy here to be with you guys. I'm Yuan Ziyi from Fudan University. I believe that China-US relations are about seeking cooperation in competition, pursuing consensus in dialogue.
I am Ouyang Liaoxin. I'm studying French interpreting and international relations at Shanghai International Studies University. We are finally going to have a discussion on China-US issues while having a nice cup of coffee.
Hello, my name is Amy from Pennsylvania in the United States. I am a graduate student studying global business journalism at Tsinghua University.
My name is Symington W. Smith, or Wei Ziming, and I'm studying Chinese politics and foreign policy at Tsinghua University.
My name is Han Shuyuan. I'm a sophomore in Tsinghua University, majoring in literature and linguistics.
Hello, my name is Miriam Frank. I am from the United States and I'm an English lecturer at Renmin University of China.
Okay, great. So for the very first topic we're going to discuss would be how the American friends and our Chinese friends view each other.
International democracy or self-centered?
Individualism, democracy, and diversity.
很多人把美国比作是自由的灯塔，但最近好像这个灯塔不怎么亮。
Probably I will think of about the gunfire that happens in America.
When I think of China, three key words that come to my mind has to be fast-paced, ancient, and modern.
Big, industrial, and the Olympics. Can be two ways. Big can also fall into industrial, but also the way I was thinking of it would be population. Because China's just a big country, it's a lot of people living there. And for industrial, China is one of the leaders of manufacturing in many different things. And I thought of the Olympics because of the 2008 Beijing Olympics and the upcoming Winter Olympics.
我觉得这个美国人可能更关注个人的发展，而不是集体的利益。
To be powerful, influential, and manufacturing. Just how far-reaching China is and how much they produce for the world. They are the world's leading manufacturer for many different goods, and they are one of the largest economies in the world. So they're pretty powerful.
The Z generation in the US, for example, we have a better understanding of China and a more open understanding of China than our older generations in the United States, as we've had more opportunities over the years to travel to China, work there, study abroad there. And I think this has really opened up our minds and opened up our ideas towards what China is, what China does.
I guess we tend to have a more multi-dimensional angle to the United States.
I believe that Gen Z is more open to cultures. They're more willing to travel, they're more curious, they want to understand rather than judge themselves.
I think going off of that, I think the younger generation is, willing to listen to other people's experience and get to know their background and story, as opposed to automatically writing people off as a certain stereotype. I think people of younger generations are more accepting of different cultures, as she had mentioned, and that leads to a lot of constructive conversations.
They literally think everything is better in the United States. In their minds, America is a heaven. But for us, younger generation, we tend to hold a critical view towards the United States, and we believe there will be a paradise. And this paradise is right here.
Current generation, or Generation Z, has a more positive mindset towards China.
So, Amy, you came to China a few years back, and you've never been here before. And what was your first impression about China, and how has that changed ever since you came?
I think before coming to China, I didn't really know anyone who was ever to China before, so the impression was kind of the generic American impression that China's like so behind, don't go to China, like very negative impressions. But I decided to go anyways, and I think one of the biggest differences is the mix of the old and the new, because it's progressing so forward so fast, but there's so much like old history within China, where the US has kind of slowed down and going forward, and it's kind of been the same for quite a while.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in Shanghai or in Beijing, especially these big cities, they change so quickly, and it kind of forces you to be also active in learning and adapting. And Zming, you study diplomacy though, with regard to that, and you've been to so many different countries. But I mean, tell us about how you grew up in all those different cultures.
Yeah, I mean, I've grown, I was born in the States, and then, I lived in Sweden for 7 years. But ever since I was a baby, I've been going back and forth from China to Europe and America and vice versa. I think one of the biggest differences is the sense of personal space is a little bit different. Like if I'm doing something, everyone's gonna ask me, hey, what are you doing today? How was last night? And maybe people you don't even know well. For example, in the streets, you see like just strangers, like and out in the street, right? They'll come up to you and be like, oh, where are you from? Hey, and like really look at you.
Oh,
like,
did you have lunch?
Yeah,
What did you have? Did
Who
you
are
like
you?
it?
Where are you from? Like, I'm gonna check it out. Hey, how is it? And they take pictures of it, and you're like, oh, hi, how's it going? So this is very different from the US, but you get used to it, and it's fun, right?
Yeah, so we definitely, I mean, for a lot of people, they have a different sense of, say, boundaries, so-called between the private or public life. But I mean, sometimes it's also because people are very warm and welcoming, and they would like to know you, even if you're a stranger.
I think that's because Chinese people value interpersonal relationship a lot.
And I feel like there's this thing with like people who I've met in China where they'll say, oh, I don't want to speak English. My English isn't very good. And then you hear them talk and they speak like almost sound native. And then certain like foreigners will be like, yeah, I speak this language. I know 3 words.
Yeah, it's a very different, I think, type of characteristics for people. But I mean, you speak very good Chinese already, and you can understand so much. Tell us about the whole process of learning
Chinese.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I started learning Chinese in high school. I had a tutor just on the side of My classes every day didn't have Chinese offered in my high school, so I just found a tutor.
And what do you guys then think of the Americans when you first get to know some of them in your life?
Well, I have tons of stereotypes. Well, American people, in my stereotype, they tend to be loud in public spaces. They have a lack of knowledge about the rest of the world. And there are nice things too. American people tend to be casual no matter the occasion, whether it's a very official business occasion, they're open to jokes, even when we're talking numbers and business. And so that's one of the good things that I appreciate about in American people. And I think we Chinese people need that.
Yeah, to sometimes get a bit more chill and
That's
adding
right.
to a bit more humor into our life.
They always give you a compliment.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't have my hair washed today, for example, and they still would say to me
your
that
hairstyle looks amazing.
You have a long style like
Right.
that.
That's what we do too in China.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
cultures communicate with one another. You can also see a lot of Chinese people being complimented, say, "Oh, thank you," instead of saying, "No, I'm actually not that good." And even some Americans are showing more humility by saying, "Oh, je parle un peu français."
Un peu l'anglais.
Right. So anything though, side question here, that you try to persuade your grandparents, for example, into, but failed because they were very much stuck in their perception about the other country, for example.
The security of the society in America. Because when I talk to my grandparents about my plan to study abroad, like days ago, they will begin worrying about my safety because they know there are a lot of gunshots happened in America.
I think my opinion is I'm not super pro guns, I've never been, but at the same time some people's view in the US is, well, if everyone else has a gun, I have to have one, because if someone comes in to my house with a gun, are you gonna fight them off with a kitchen knife or something?
Sure.
But
Especially in certain parts of the U.S., like Texas, right?
So I think it all comes down to the fundamental question of what are governments supposed to offer to its people?
Yeah.
When people feel the need that they need a weapon as much as guns to protect themselves, we know what the governments are offering them.
Yeah, maybe there's something missing.
Yeah.
That's one of the explanations here. But I mean, it can be also explained in another way, that when the United States was founded in the first place, its conviction was that, all right, you have this weaponry so that you can stand up for yourself, especially against authority or a corrupted government and stuff. But when that becomes a culture, when that becomes a norm, it kind of reshapes other aspects of the society that makes maybe, I don't know, the government hard or even impossible to provide the so-called security for the general public without guns. Do you guys agree with that though?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you were saying, that's a really good question there with, what is the government supposed to provide people, right? And I think if you would ask certain Americans that, what in popular consciousness, what is the American government supposed to provide its citizens? You would say liberty, right? Like liberty and freedom, the ability to be free. That's what they're supposed to provide. But for example, in China, you ask some people what is government supposed to provide, they'll say safety, right? In America, you feel like my safety, it's my job to ensure my safety. Whereas in China, it's like, oh, the government needs to provide me my safety. So there's this kind of big, deep-rooted, as you said, rooted in this constitutional founding of America, right?
And I think that's why American people do not want to wear masks during the COVID-19. I think it's kind of a violation of their own right, because the thing is, it's my health and that matters. So it's none of the government's business.
Maybe it would be more effective if the government says to people, you can't, from now on you can't.
Yeah,
exactly.
Fair enough. And it's very complicated because it's a situation where your free will affect others' health.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. It actually goes against the whether it's political scientists or sociologists, males, no harm principle, because it actually does harm to other people. And then how would you justify your type of so-called freedom, right, or personal rights at that moment?
I just think it's kind of anytime, like a lot of times in the US, people are told you need to do this, even if it's to help, sometimes people just still want to make their own choice. For example, with COVID, with wearing masks, getting vaccinated, like the government's pushing it because it's a good thing to help not only the US, but the entire world so we can eventually open back up. But then when you have people say, well, it's my choice, but it's helping everyone, not just yourselves. So you're taking, it's not your own rights, it's taking rights away from other people at the same time.
Yeah, true. And you were saying?
I was just going to say, it makes us look at the issue of freedom a little bit more, and like, is it good to have a lot of freedom? And sometimes it'll backfire on us, you know, and just depends on the situation.
我觉得民主它最直观的一个含义就是人民主权，它是跟专政是相对的，就是应该是能够让人民发声。
Democracy grants, anyone the option to voice their opinion, to elect an official that they feel will represent their own values.
I agree with what he says. I find that it's important to elect those that meet your own values and will pull through on what they say.
I think the ultimate goal of democracy is to ensure or improve the well-being of people. And I think every policy should be made by people for the benefit of people. Like, we just finished the election of people's representative of Chaoyang district. And I, as a student, just gave my own vote.
Democracy to me is mainly just voting, having a choice, voting for who you want to be in office, politics.
To me, what I think democracy is more of now what China has developed in is called the whole process democracy. Now this one, I think that it transcends and goes to a higher level than we see with Western style democracy, in which I think this is what democracy is, and that all the people truly do have a voice. All people can truly take part in the decision making and the discussions and deliberations before major decisions are made, which will impact not only the individual but the whole country and society as a whole.
我觉得美国那种民主就是比较过度民主了。他们那种游行示威的方式，虽然说是民主的一种体现，但是我觉得它会造成一些社会秩序的混乱。
我们希望这些民主其实就是所有人类一个非常美好的愿望。我觉得，就无论是我们的国家，还是他们的国家，还是所有的全人类，都是这种追求的。但是实际中，他们真正做的那些事情，和他们所宣扬那种民主到底是不是一码事，这个问题还两说着呢。就我觉得我们这个国家，他似乎好像不是特别去宣传民主这件事情啊。我了解的比较少，但是我觉得好像我们这些国家在做某些事情的时候，反而比西方的一些国家更加有效。
他们认为我们不民主，是因为现在的民主是由他们来定义的。我觉得大多数中国人来说，他追求的是，可能是一个更富强、更繁荣，然后人民更幸福的一个社会。那现在形势如果适合我们国家，我觉得它就是民主，并不一定是说一定要美式民主才算是民主。
How to truly get the government to go, into amongst the masses, amongst the people. I think this is something that the U.S. can learn from China. I think, to really actively listen to the people's voice, to not only make big promises and just, big talk during the election, but then after the election's over, then it just is back to everything else, and people feel upset and they don't like the results and just feel like they're being lied to. I think this can be learned, I think, from China.
Then what do you guys think about the definition of democracy? And if it's something that, it's being told by so many different countries, do you think it's one thing that all countries and nations should seek? What do you guys think?
Well, first of all, I don't think democracy is one thing, it's many things. And the whole thing, this whole idea of living in a democratic country is about having a government and having your leaders, your politicians making decisions according to people's will and to achieve what matters to the people. And right now, I don't believe that we should have a clear one and only definition of democracy.
And I think Chinese government is now pushing forward the democracy with Chinese characteristics. We have the two sessions, like the People's Congress and the CPPCC. And I think Chinese government is pushing forward people-centered policies, and that is the core of Chinese democracy.
For the three of you living here, would you say that there are democratic elements that you can feel and observe every day in China? And do you think that China is also pursuing its own type of democracy?
I think the perception, as you were saying, from like media is very much like US freedom, you can do anything you want. And then China is like, you're stuck in a little box. But I think it's definitely like they're quite similar to each other in a sense. Like they definitely have their own differences because every country is different from each other.
Exactly.
But I don't think it's ever a bad thing because every country has different cultures and everything's going to run according to that.
And would you say that from a Westerner, that the reason why the Western media doesn't see China's democracy as really a democracy is that they don't see any drama here. They don't see politicians at each other's throat. If there is no drama, how can you call that a diplomacy? So how do you guys see about that?
Actually not. I think it's more result-oriented. If the government can produce good results for the people and to protect its people, to provide safety and security for its people, then I think it's a good form of democracy that all of us should respect.
There's more action placed upon policy.
Do you think that the media are, in both countries, are portraying each other in a fair way?
I think that, at least from the US perspective, and this is not just talking about just the two countries, but especially with the news, sometimes the news isn't anywhere just about saying the news. You have to compete the news with interesting TV shows. So they're going to make everything as dramatic as possible. Pick the good guys and the bad guys. So it's like following a story of a TV show.
It's manufacturing a narrative itself in the news as well.
Exactly. And sometimes what that ends up being nowadays is the US and whoever's in charge is the good guy and China's the bad guy. So they might not actually be following everything that's going on in the society, but they're the villain. You can't say like, oh, look at this great thing they did. You're gonna point out all the bad things. So then as a society as a whole, if you don't follow any other media besides traditional news sources like on TV and papers, you're only gonna know this one narrative and that's gonna be your perception.
It's always about making a good balance. Indeed, we may see many Western media, the mainstream media, for those reporters and journalists who have never been inside China, claiming themselves to be, China specialists and stuff, manufacturing so many narratives that do not present facts or truths is a more prevalent phenomenon. Better thing that both sides could do is to, more actively learn from each other instead of simply focusing on who is doing what wrong and then making the government or the politicians or the whole people an evil, civilization or nation. Just like the famous Chinese sociologist Fei Xiaotong once said, we need to appreciate the beauty in other people so that we can all excel in our own beauty and coexist in harmony with one another.
Yeah, sometimes I look at the same news article in different languages and it's interesting to see where the information lacks.
And I think sometimes the pure exposure to media only brings you emotions, but the true engagement will bring you the truth and the actuality.
Then what do you guys think would be the interpretation of socialism now in the United States?
I think that in the US that people are kind of scared of socialism because in their eyes they think everyone's going to like lose a little bit of everything so people are more equal. It's gonna they're gonna wake up one day and the whole
everything has changed.
They have that type of imagined fear of socialism as a word. But a lot of things they would like to achieve, say, equality, is a characteristic of socialism anyways, right?
Yeah, so some characteristics are already in place.
Exactly.
And some can be added, I guess, if necessary.
I think a problem we have in America is that we tend to think that if the other guy or the other person, if my neighbor gets rich, I'm not going to get rich. It's like a thing where you're competing all the time against everyone around you. You know what I mean? And it's very hard to like get that cooperative spirit. You know, it's
that
like
community spirit.
Yeah, I mean the community spirit exists, and you get that a lot on like you see. I mean, look at the sports games. You know, there's this huge debate. Like, and we were talking about socialism earlier, right? Like, why can't Americans, and I understand they are accepting socialism more. Look at Bernie Sanders,
Exactly.
He's right, and a lot of supporters and stuff like that. But the reason we haven't really tipped that point and elected someone like that is because I think Americans, they don't know. Most of them don't know the difference between socialism and communism. When you say socialism, even if you say Bernie Sanders, they think Soviet Union style communism. That's immediately what we think, and they're like, we don't want that in America.
Yeah.
And I think it's time to, as we often say in China, get rid of that Cold War mentality.
It's only orthodoxy to say categorize the so-called socialism and communism or democracy, because these notions, they evolve themselves. You know, they change all the time, and they adapt to the different endemic cultures with their own histories.
And I think what people need to understand in the States as well is that you can have both. Right? Being a little bit socialist doesn't mean your democracy is gone.
Right.
You still have it.
Yeah,
You
true.
still have it. Right? You can have both, and they're very black and white. That's because of our bipartisan two-party system.
Yeah,
right?
it's totally related.
Black and
mentality.
white, black and
yeah.
white, black and white. You can literally hate your neighbor because he voted Republican. It's
Right.
just like, I'm not talking to this guy anymore.
It's so true. Yeah.
True.
It's not good. No.
We need to accept that a lot of things are on a spectrum. We're not even on one dimensional spectrum. There could be multiple dimensions, but there are just many things in between that are not necessarily evil or completely good. True. So do you guys think that when we are advocating for equality amongst races, we should not only focus on, for example, the already oppressed, of course, black people who have been enslaving, the Western history. We should also, have more attention on the Asians who are also marginalized.
America is a country that is obsessed. And you'll see this nowhere else on earth. And this is not an exaggeration. It is obsessed with race. It is absolutely obsessed. And it is not a Western thing. It's a very, very American thing. Because if you take race and, for example, affirmative action, for example, Black Lives Matter, or even Asian Lives Matter, things like this, and you take them to other Western countries like France. In France, they think this is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous, because in France, their definition of being French has absolutely nothing to do with being based on your race. In the States, we have like British American, Dutch American, German American, right? They don't have that in France.
Exactly.
You're just a French citizen. And I think that's very interesting. And I say even China, we don't, yes, we have so many minorities and everything, but we're not obsessed with minorities. We're more like, we are Chinese. You don't say like, I am Han, I am Manchu, right? So there's not this big emphasis on that. In America, there's so much emphasis, and I really think they need to move away from that and kind of get more towards the French model of I'm an American, and it doesn't matter what I look like or what my race is, I'm just American. And this, in a way you could say, movements like Black Lives Matter or Asian Lives Matter, it's important, it highlights these communities and everything, but how about we just don't make them a minority at all, right? We just see everyone as equal, get rid of this stuff. And I'm very happy that does not exist in China. And we,
because we are only creating more demarcations instead of, collaboration and unity. For the civic society that we are striving for. How do you see the future of US-China relations? Where do you think it should be going, and what do you think you can do?
I think the future is really, as the young generation, the future is really in our hands. We really need to one by one work towards a certain way, because if we do nothing, then nothing's gonna happen. And if we hold back and stay to kind of how we are now, we're gonna stay in the same situation or make it worse. I think we all have to take a progressive thinking, and it's not just towards US-China relations, it's the relations with the whole world.
Well, I think the fierce competition between the two countries will still remain. in
For
the
sure.
near future. So it's really hard to have a totally pure friendship between the two countries, especially on the national level. But I believe that people-to-people exchanges will
Right.
try to make the situation better.
Yeah, I think going off of what you said, just not being closed-minded to other cultures, especially if you're able to understand another culture and be able to communicate with the people of that country, it can really help improve certain aspects.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to make a prediction on the future of U.S.-China relations, I said we're in an awkward spot, and we're going to be in an awkward spot for quite a while.
Takes time.
It takes a lot of time, and we need to. This doesn't mean we don't have these things. We need a lot more exchanges. We need to open up these channels. And I know it's very hard during COVID and stuff like that, but it needs to be done. We need to go towards that direction of more talking, more Biden, Xi Jinping summits. We need more of that. We need more of all this kind of
dialogues,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, that could point out the fact that when we really loosen up, when we see that we are human beings, maybe
Yes.
different,
Yes.
but we can still have, arguments. But after all, we're sitting on the same table. We're talking with one another.
And we're not out here to change each other.
Yeah.
Because I think if two nations agree on everything, then one of them doesn't have to exist.
Well, yes, they can be the same nation. I mean, that point made can be achieved, say, by the two countries realizing they have shared goals more than ever. The climate change, the pandemic, or even inequalities in many different ways. They can learn from each other's experiences. They can try to avoid from making the similar mistake.
As bad as things are looking right now, I'm pretty optimistic about the relations between US and China, because at one part we have all these common challenges that we have to deal with commonly, and also people in the United States are starting to realize they have their own problems in their system. Them with us, Chinese people, we are trying to communicate, and that's a good sign to me.
What would you guys say to those people who are actually kind of hostile once they think of the United States or think of China? What would you say to those people?
I think one of the only ways to actually communicate like different viewpoints is to talk or go to the different places, because if you've always lived in the US, if you've always lived in China and never talked to people of different cultures, you're not, even if someone tells you, oh, I went there, how about you change your viewpoint? They'll be like, no, I still have my viewpoint. But if they actually go and see new things, talk to new people, their viewpoints might change.
I think, I had a friend who was studying at Schwarzman in Tsinghua, which is one of the colleges at Tsinghua, and he actually had a very interesting thing to share with me. He said, a couple of the students that we enrolled this year, they literally hate China. And we picked them to come on purpose because they hate it. And I was like, why would you do that? And then I just thought it was very eye-opening. He said, because this is the type of people whose minds we want to change. We want to take someone who just really, really doesn't like China. Then you come to China, and then you experience it, and then you tell me, after 1 year, what do you feel? Do you still hate it? And the funny thing is, year after year, and many of the people who really, really just hate China, at the end, they always kind of say, you know what? It's pretty good. Like, they have to admit it, and then they go back to the US, and I guess they tell their families, they tell their friends, or later on, if they become, politicians or leaders, they have a more realistic view. And I thought, that's what we need. We need to embrace this kind of, at least in the beginning, at least, to a reasonable extent. Right.
So if I have to say one sentence to those people with hostility against China, I would say that fear comes from ignorance. So it could be expensive or complicated for you to actually come to China, but what you can do is hear our voices, listen to what we're saying, listen to what we're saying right now, for example.
Exactly, as long as we realize the urgency of maintaining the good and collaborative relationship between China and the United States. Because, well, as our theme today suggests, the relationship is too big to fail. And as I think President Xi said in the virtual meeting held with President Biden, that the two countries may not solve all the problems together. I mean, for any other countries, I would say. But few things could be solved if the two do not work together. That's how important the two biggest economies, who also wield great international influence and political power, should prioritize in many issues by seeing our shared goals and interests with a shared future. Thank you very much for the dialogues, and I know that many of you have also spent a tremendous amount of time preparing for some of the speeches based on your personal experience and also some of your research that I know of. So now I suppose everyone is looking forward to hearing your thoughts and feelings as well. Okay? Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Dylan Walker, a master's degree student of international politics at Beijing Language and Culture University. As a youth from the US and also a member of the Communist Party USA, I'm honored to take part in the 7th episode of Youth Power, especially given the topic of this episode, Too Big to Fail, China-US Relations in the Eyes of Gen Z. Now, as someone who lives in China and plans to stay in China to start a living and a family in the future, the development of China-US relations and the direction it goes in is something that I pay close attention to and do my best to study, understand, and do my part to help in building a more positive and healthy relationship between our two countries. Looking back over the past year, since the new administration in the US took office, I was glad to see that President Xi Jinping and President Joe Biden had a phone call on the eve of Chinese New Year, and not too long ago held a virtual meeting showing our two countries and the world just how important the communication and cooperation between China and the US is. Although, after a month after this virtual meeting, I believe the easing of relations and tensions will not happen overnight. Rather, it will be a complicated and slow process. But this should not deter the youth from our two countries to do what we can to bring closer the gaps between our two people and countries and help tear down barriers and instead build bridges to facilitate mutual understanding, cooperation, and respect. One example which I take dearly to my heart is by taking advantage of studying abroad and using it not only as a way for us American and Chinese students to further our own education, but also to help us better understand China and the US. When we US students immerse ourselves in Chinese society and Chinese culture, we come to realize that the people of our two nations are more alike than different. And only when we put aside ideological differences, prejudice, and Cold War mentality, this will only bring us closer together, and likewise for Chinese students who study in the US. On June 21st of this year, in 2021, President Xi Jinping replied to a letter from international students at Peking University, encouraging all of us international students to gain a deeper understanding of China as it really is, urging us to share our thoughts and experiences with more people and play an active role in promoting friendship between the peoples of all countries. And a key part to doing this is, as President Xi himself said, is to understand today's China, one must understand the Communist Party of China. Only by doing this can we overseas students and the people of the world, especially the people of the US, gain a better understanding of what China is, what China has, and continues to do to help the world. Now, through my many interactions with my American friends and old high school classmates, of course there are some who have prejudice or stereotypes against China, which is only natural that they think this way due to them being bombarded with only negative news about China. So I took it upon myself through explaining and sharing my experiences studying and living in China and traveling to different parts of the country, although it was by no means easy at first. You know, as an example, anything you can buy in the US, you can also buy it here in China. But even this statement was doubted. So I would ask my classmate, what do I have to gain by lying about something like this? So over time, I showed more of my American classmates and friends how to access Chinese news websites, video websites, and even Chinese TikTok videos of different topics, so as to gain a better understanding and more comprehensive understanding of today's China. But I also welcome them to always ask me questions about what they hear on the news in the US, so I can give them a different perspective, namely the Chinese perspective, as there are always two sides to every story. And another topic that comes to my mind was my experience during the initial outbreak of COVID-19 in January 2020, when I was celebrating Spring Festival with my girlfriend and her family at her hometown in Beijing City, Sichuan province. At the time when we were all in lockdown, when we would have to go to the supermarket, we have to write down on a form the time, our address, phone number, our names, where we're going, and then once we go the supermarket, they'll take our temperature. Then when we come back to the apartment complex, take our temperature again. We write down the time we arrived, where do we go, and then we go inside, as we wanted to do our part into putting a stop to the spread of the virus. But I wanted to use these stories and experiences with COVID-19 in China to show my friends and family in the US just how serious China takes the epidemic prevention policies, which is to put the people's lives and health above all else. Now, after almost 2 years of sharing my experiences and stories in China, I'm happy to say that a few of my friends would now like to travel to China, as seeing is believing. But I'm lucky to have been learning Chinese since I was about 5 years old, and some of my family members have visited me in China before and now have American friends who wish to visit China as soon as possible. So I only can do my best to present them with a more dynamic view of China's true situation and by sharing my experiences alongside other resources. But like President Xi Jinping said himself, seeing is believing. I hope that through more positive exchanges between our two people, especially the youth of our two countries, that more and more people will come to China for work, studying, and tourism, and will share what they saw with their friends and family. Though it will be no easy task, but the future of our two countries, for a large part, rests on the shoulders of us Chinese and American youth. And only when we unite together and put the common interests of our nation and people together, will we be able to create a healthier China-US relations, which not only benefits the people of our countries, but also the entire world. Just as President Xi himself said, China and the United States are like two giant ships sailing in the ocean. It is important for our two countries to keep a steady hand on the tiller, so that the two giant ships will break waves and forge ahead together without losing direction or speed, still less colliding with each other. Therefore, I hope more young people from the US and China will do their part in the building of a shared future for mankind, as well as China-US relations. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be here today to share with you my views on China-US relations. Over the past few decades, the two nations have come a long way, doing things together that have benefited not only both of us, but the world as a whole. So, how is it that today this relationship is like a good marriage turned sour? The state of our relationship does indeed seem like that of a bickering couple. A lot of the time, we don't talk to one another, but past one another, where slights and cold shoulders are frequent. In short, it is antagonism and hostility that rule, rather than collaboration and friendship. In a recent survey by Pew Research, 67% of American respondents said they had negative views of China, rating the country below 50 on a scale of 0 to 100. So what's at play here? First, media. Even now, some Americans see China as dirty, backward, and full of ill intent. In other words, ignorance helped in no small way by media, both old and new, has resulted in a distorted image that generates needless suspicion and fear. In fact, some media have begun invoking the suicide trap to argue that when a rising power seeks to usurp the place of a rival, war is all but inevitable. But just how relevant are teachings from Athenian city-states to the 21st century? This China-phobic outlook thus turns what could be a very positive Sino-US relationship into dog-eat-dog competition. Next, bipartisan politics. In the US, any politician seen to be over-friendly to China risks being published by voters, acted on by political rivals. It's either us or them, the argument goes, which itself feeds on the baseless suspicion of China I mentioned earlier. In 2009, President Barack Obama paid a visit to Shanghai Fudan University, my alma mater, and delivered a speech. It was widely held as a ray of optimism for China-US relations. Yet, in an annual State of the Union address several months later, Obama, obviously playing to the gallery of the two houses of Congress, gave the impression that China with some kind of adversary. Finally, and most importantly, the imagination of transforming China. Since the People's Republic of China and the United States established full diplomatic relations 42 years ago, incumbents of the White House have largely held a rosy view of China. Strategies then began to interpret China's openness as a sign of the becoming liberalization of the whole communist world. Eventually, it was argued they would become like us. However, as China continued to develop and the US gradually lost hegemony, accommodation gave way to outright hostility. That hostility is now dressed up as a law for democracy. And not just any democracy, but democracy whose rules, characteristics, and implementation must be approved by the USA. In fact, that democracy is as American as Coca-Cola. If it's not made with the secret recipe, it can't be the real thing. But such attempts to delegitimize Chinese democracy or democracy anywhere else are doomed to fail. It may take some time for that nonsense to disappear, but in the meantime, US politicians ought to heed this advice. You can't be a global firefighter when your own house is on fire. Which brings me to some wise words Richard Nixon spoke as he proposed a toast on that visit to China in 1972. He said, "We have at times in the past been enemies. We have great differences today. What brings us together is that we have common interests which transcend these differences. But while we cannot close the gulf between us, we can try to bridge it so that we may be able to talk across it." The pandemic has underlined how dependent we are on one another. The United States needs to embrace a changing international order, one in which developing countries have a bigger say in how the international economic pie is divided, and where the way in which international public goods are delivered is changed. US primacy that has become a norm and the liberal international order that goes with it are about to undergo a profound change, one in which all nations work together to give us a better future. In bringing that to fruition, young people have a key role to play. That includes being able to disagree in a mature way, but to be able to accommodate each other and communicate openly and inclusively. Differences are things we ought to celebrate rather than eliminate, because diversity is one vital characteristic we can cherish as we build our future together. Thank you very much.
I first arrived to China in 2013 to study Chinese at Beijing Language and Culture University. This was a huge step for me as I had never left the United States before. When I made the decision to move to China, I left everything behind, my family, my friends, and my comfortable life. I completed my undergraduate degree in 2017 and was immersed completely in the language for 4 full years. My connection to China is a unique one. I have traveled nearly every province in China and seen the amazing development of Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and other metropolis cities. I've also experienced the most rural areas of China, spending a whole month plus celebrating Chinese New Year in the small town of Panzhihua in Sichuan province. I have firsthand large fields of agriculture and an abundance of sources provided for people's daily lives. I have returned once again to China and am working now at Renmin University of China. Ever since I arrived to China, I had an urge to spread the knowledge I obtained in the language and fascination of the culture with my fellow American friends in the United States. After I graduated, I returned to the United States and took the role of a teaching assistant while completing my master's degree in Chinese pedagogy. I was able to spread Chinese language and culture to my students who were all very eager to learn. They had plans of becoming future translators, doing business in China, and even some considered studying for their future studies in China. I felt like I was a true inspiration to them, showing a lot how a foreigner could also learn Chinese language at a near native level and enjoy a brand new culture. I also taught K through 12 Chinese, which was even more culturally focused and inspirational to young adults. I do feel as if I have been successful so far in spreading Chinese language and culture to the United States and will continue to do so. I'm no longer a student anymore and am much more engaged with Chinese young adults than ever before. I can see clearly a drastic change in Chinese society from when I was a student between 2013 to 2017, and now returning as a lecturer in 2021. When I was a student between 2013 to 2017, many people were afraid to discuss important issues, and technology was still lacking efficiently. People now are much more concerned with issues such as global warming, keeping a sustainable environment, various policies regarding population and education measures, as well as technological improvements. It is clear that China is in the right direction, and young adults are trying to make a change to the current challenges of today. Oftentimes, I think the US can learn from China and vice versa in various aspects. I think to really be able to connect through with a new culture and to better the relations between any two countries is first to primarily be able to communicate with the people. Without prior communication in place, nothing can exist further. As an English public speaking instructor, I have never before understood the importance of being able to communicate effectively and the challenges people face sometimes in communicating at a basic level of understanding. Young people who plan on improving China-US relations, learning Chinese is key, and understanding Chinese culture is just as important. With this knowledge, I believe many issues today can be solved and overall relations will be much more positive.
习近平主席曾说过，中美分别是最大的发展中国家和最大的发达国家。中美能否处理好彼此关系，攸关世界前途命运。而人类已经成为你中有我，我中有你的命运共同体。因此，我觉得中美两国的年轻人首先要去主动了解对方的文化和社会习俗，加强沟通和交流，多一些学习和尊重，少一些敌视和贬低。尽管中美两国关系近年来存在一些挑战，但还是要像君子一样，和而不同，相逢一笑泯恩仇，携手合作，为构建人类命运共同体而努力。最后，如同习近平主席与拜登总统的电话会议所言，中美关系不是一道是否搞好的选择题，而是一道如何搞好的必答题。
Hi, I'm Peter from the United States, currently a freshman at the School of Social Science, and I'm planning to major in economics. Besides of my studies, I'm a part-time athlete for table tennis. I have represented the US in a number of international events. I started practicing table tennis at the age of 5. When I was 12, I made the Beijing team. In 2017, I've got third place of under 18 in the United States Midwest Championship. In 2019, I represented the US in 3 international tournaments. ITTF international junior tournaments in Hong Kong, Taipei, and Taicang. In the coming years, I hope Tsinghua will increase its efforts to build the table tennis team so that more and more students can participate in the sport and experience the charm of table tennis. I have just won the first place in the Beijing Collegiate Championship, and I aim to attend more championships for Tsinghua in the coming years. I hope to achieve more results for Tsinghua in the Collegiate Cup to add to the school's reputation and to improve my understanding of the game. I'm looking forward to the school launching a special table tennis program so that I can lead Tsinghua to excel in the national championship. I will train hard over the next 4 years to improve my technique, tactics, and ability to withstand pressure in critical moments. I will do my best to make it through the trials to be on the US team for the World Championship and the Olympic squad. I will continue to train in Beijing, and hopefully I will have the opportunity to observe and learn from the national team. I plan to train after school. I have a deep love for table tennis, so it will be an essential part of my life to balance it with my studies. Training makes me happy, training makes me feel relaxed, and table tennis is a great way for me to get my life in order. When I first came to Tsinghua, I was glad to see its very beautiful campus, grand architecture style, nice accommodation, very bright students and peers, and extremely helpful staff. The canteens are also quite delicious. I have always admired the rigorous and genuine academic style of Tsinghua, and I believe that Tsinghua cultivates a full range of talents, and its students are highly capable of adapting to the environment while possessing high academic abilities. I'm glad to be in the School of Social Science, where I can explore my favorite subject, learn to think about it from different perspectives, link various subjects together, and analyze an issue from multiple viewpoints. As a freshman and sophomore, I want to experience as much as possible and find a direction that I'm really interested in. College life is pretty enjoyable so far, but whenever there's deadlines, it becomes challenging to organize and plan everything out in such a small period of time. I've made a lot of friends in Tsinghua, and we are appreciating this road full of knowledge and excitement.
The world's oceans are big enough to accommodate thousands of ships, and the Earth is big enough for US and China to coexist and thrive. I believe that the lessons and experience learned from US-China relations tells us that for the two countries to get along, 3 principles must be followed. First, mutual respect. Second, peaceful coexistence. And third, win-win cooperation. In today's episode, we've heard our young sailors talk. You may still find some of their ideas leave something to be desired, but nonetheless are food for thought. I believe this candid talk will further our mutual understanding and raise a flag to the whole world that Generation Z believes working together rather than against each other is the way forward. The virtual meeting between Presidents Xi and Biden have exemplified the importance of having dialogues, working together, and sailing in harmony with one another. Young people are part of the team effort to get us all on the right course, and if any crew were ever worthy of their place on the ship, the song of these young sailors, with their unbridled enthusiasm and energy, tells us it is Generation Z. We have no idea what course the young people have plotted for us, but with their obvious dedication to our shared future, we can be sure there will be a worthy match for the toughest weather and the tallest waves that we will face up to.
I think the relationship between China and America will continue to be competitive, but competition is not mutually exclusive with cooperation. I hope that the competition will be a healthy one and a fair one.
Have an open mind, be willing to communicate with people who might not be from your background, might not be from your neighborhood, from your country, and be willing to learn from others' experiences.
I don't think it's necessary to define or label China and US relationship. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, all challenges and benefits are to be faced by humanity together. So cooperation is the only answer.
We should all be kind to each other.
We all have to continue working together, put aside any differences maybe some people have, and just realize we're all part of just one global village. We're all part of, this earth. We're all the same in the end, and we have more similarities than we do differences.